Hi, welcome or welcome back. My name's Eleanor. I may look like the same Eleanor I was the last time I filmed a couple of weeks ago, but I'm not. I'm now a grandmother. I have had the absolute delight, the sheer pleasure, the joy of becoming a grandma 10 days ago. And it's hard to concentrate on anything else, frankly. That being said, this proves my commitment to poetry, because despite the fact that I am utterly infatuated with my gorgeous grandchild, I have been continuing with my workshop on versification / prosody, and I have been continuing to read. So first of all, I thought I'd give you an update on what's been happening with my views on prosody. If possible, I'm enjoying the study of prosody even more than a couple of weeks ago. I flippin' love it. Now, I know I mentioned, if you're new here, in the last video, I mentioned one book that I recommend if you want to learn a bit more about prosody or versification. And there's another one that I can recommend. There's only two. Don't buy any others. They're not very good. This one is called Versification, A Short Introduction by James McCowley. He's actually an Aussie, so go the Aussies. This is also a very good book. And I have reached maximum geek level. I am now reading this for fun. I just really like it. It's like a linguistic puzzle writing metric verse. And I find it strangely freeing as well, because with the constraint of counting beats and trying to work within a certain meter, you discover a lot of different things. Well, at least I do. But something else has cropped up. I noticed that I've become really competitive. Now, look, I've been known to be competitive academically, I won't lie. But it's been a while since I was in high school or university. And I thought to myself, why am I so competitive? So I mentioned it to my teacher, and he said, "Oh, I think what you're talking about is something that naturally happens when you're trying to write using these metrical rules, that there's a certain virtuosity," that's the word he used, virtuosity, that you're aspiring to. And I thought, yes, that's what it is. But it's also not quite that. It's also the one time when it comes to critiquing poetry that you can objectively say, this is correct, this is not. This is right, this is wrong. This is good, this is bad. And that you can only really do that objectively when you're in a prosody workshop and you're all given an assignment. And so let's say the assignment is to write a line in iambic pentameter. And I write a line that I think is in iambic pentameter, but actually uses 5 trochees. So instead of sounding, and this is the most basic, let's say, exercise that you might start with. So instead of sounding like this rhythm, da-dum, 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 etc., I've written da-dum, 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 da-dum. And I think I've written iambs, and someone can say objectively, and they'd be right, that is incorrect, Eleanor. That line of poetry, that poetic line is wrong in this context. And I think that's really the crux of the issue when it comes to the way a lot of poets these days steer clear from even studying prosody, no less using it in any way in their writing. There's a sense that There's something tricky you have to learn, and it is tricky. It is not easy. And you have to practice, much as you might learn scales before you start playing the piano, much as you might, if let's say you're interested in playing soccer, you might go to training before you actually go to play the match. So there are pros and cons to that. In one sense, you could say, well, really, I mean, studying meter is really just like studying any constraint. But then, is it? Is it really? Because historically, the system of prosody that is in these books that I've been recommending and that is being taught to me in this particular workshop, the history of it is European and white and male. And that doesn't mean that prosody is intrinsically part of poetry or even good poetry. On the other hand, you see, the argument, it's cyclical, it never finishes. On the other hand, wouldn't you want to know all the tools that are available to you? And if there's a certain natural rhythm to the English language, because this is particularly and specifically about the English language, if the English language has a certain way of working out rhythms and accents, wouldn't you want to study that? Why would you want to be ignorant of that? To me, knowledge always trumps ignorance. I did attend a craft lab, I think it was last year, possibly the year before, through Brooklyn Poets via Zoom. And it was a craft lab called The Decolonization of Prosody, the decolonizing of prosody or some such. And it was with Jay Deshpande, a poet I've mentioned before, who I adore, both as a poet and a teacher. And simply from the title, you see what we're dealing with here. You see the problems that are associated with the study of meter. Because if historically Black poets and female poets have been shut out of poetry magazines and poetry publishing, and on top of that, they've been told that really you have to prove yourself as a poet by showing how virtuosic you are with meter, there is a great temptation, I will not lie, to just say, well, I don't care about any of your stuff. I'm just writing my own way. So I see all of those different points. There is, however, one more thing. Learning prosody is fun for me, and I know, generally a person knows what their general abilities are. For example, I knew from a very young age that writing came more easily to me than it did to my friend. But my friend found absolutely no problem in an advanced mathematics class where it was perfectly clear to me that no matter how much I studied, I would never reach that level. There was a limit. There was a certain limit to how much I could work on this before it became obvious that I simply didn't have her capabilities. And I think with learning meter, there's something like that happening in a sense, because it reminded me of when my kids were in early primary school and they would study spelling. And it became super clear that some kids can spell and some can't. And you can teach them all you like, and yeah, you could improve their spelling, but some kids, they just get it, and some kids don't. And every Friday was a horror show because they had this ridiculous spelling test. And every week, the kids who were, who found spelling easy would feel like they were the royalty of the class, and those that didn't felt really bad about themselves. Now, how important is spelling? Actually, not very important at all. I mean, you can be a brilliant writer without actually knowing how to spell. You just need to get an editor to do the spelling. There's nothing, it's no big deal. And nowadays, with computers. But that being said also, when I think about it, spelling was probably one of the few aspects of learning English for these primary school age kids that allowed the teacher to say, this is correct, this is incorrect. And you see the parallel with studying prosody. Prosody can be used for evil or for good, is the way I'm going to put it. Personally, I am and will forever be thankful that I found my teacher, Joshua Mehigan, because he knows everything there is to know about prosody and is an extremely open and patient teacher. I found that it's made a world of difference to me when I'm reading poetry now, and it's made my writing of poetry so much more enjoyable. It's better than any linguistic puzzle, and you reap so many benefits, and you get some brilliant poems out of it. Just fun use of language. So I do highly recommend it, with a caveat. Okay, now this idea of competition, which is something that I felt in my workshop, and I should say it's not because of the workshop, it's my own competitive nature. There's the opposite thing to that, which is community and the poetic community, which is something that I've come across in the last 2 weeks and I've been thinking so much about, because I have subscribed to the Poetry magazine, which is the magazine from the American Poetry Foundation, and I received an electronic version of the October magazine, and I just felt for the first time in a long time that here was a magazine that was giving me the same love that I was open to giving it. Now, what do I mean by that? Previously, the few journals that I read, poetry journals I felt were, frankly, standoffish. They were basically a canvas for poets to have their work shown as having been chosen, the chosen ones. And it was basically just a presentation. It was, ta-da, here are the poems we've chosen. And there was nothing around it. I didn't feel any sense of community within the journal itself. It was just lacking. It was lackluster. It was stark. And I couldn't connect. Well, I come to this poetry magazine. The October issue is the first issue that is edited by the brand new editor, Adrian Matika. It's also the 110th edition. And here was a journal that welcomed me with open arms. First of all, and I'm talking only about the e-edition, the electronic edition, almost every poem had attached to it an audio version of the poem read by the poet, and read brilliantly by each poet. That already made me feel fantastic. Secondly, there are podcast episodes, and to date there are 2 episodes for this particular October edition. Each one of them is more than an hour long, and in them are discussions and interviews with poets and context for some of the poets and works within the journal. And this made a huge difference to me. Now, I can't go through every poem in Poetry Mag, even though it's very tempting. But I can say the standout, of course, is that this particular edition introduced a Black female poet who had never been in Poetry Magazine before, and who had been, as far as I can tell, ignored by most white poetry communities in the US, and that is Carolyn Marie Rogers. Now, there are many of her poems in this edition. I would recommend that you actually listen to the podcast episode alongside it, because she was born in 1940, she died in 2010. Her older sister has survived her, and her older sister is the one they interview in the episode, Nina Rogers Gordon. And you will be immersed in her stories about how Carolyn Marie grew up in their family, how they knew from a young age that she was a poet, how her older sister always admired, encouraged, and cared for her to her very last days. And you'll hear just quite amazing stories about the way Carolyn Marie would write, the techniques she had of, going for walks during the day so as to see things and hear things and then come back and write all through the night. It makes everything so much fuller when you read the poems. On top of that, there are incredible photos that Nina has chosen through great generosity to share with us via the journal. And it really is remarkable. Look, it's first and foremost, to me, I fell in love with Carolyn Marie Rogers' poems. They're quite unique in their unusual take on life, both political as a Black American and also personal as a woman and as herself, as Carolyn Marie Rogers. Her views on Christianity, her views on femininity, personal power, social power, and all within poems that have very unusual line breaks that I've never come across before with any poet. And it's ridiculous to say, because I can't point my finger and say, because of this or because of this. But when I read Carolyn Marie Rogers' poems, there's a warmth in my heart. There just is. I feel a connection with her as a person. It is rather fantastic. A few facts. She co-founded her own publishing company, and it's still ongoing today. I think it's the largest Black-owned publishing company in the US, if I'm not mistaken, up till today. It's called Third World Press, and she was one of the architects of the Black arts movement. So Yeah, I do highly recommend that. The other podcast episode, sorry, I have a very creaky chair today. The other podcast episode has Adrian Matika talking to Ross Gay and Nikki Finney. Oh, I so highly recommend that episode. It was fascinating to me to hear them talk about time. And you'll see if you read the magazine towards the end, Ross Gay, who is a poet and a prose writer, he has written essays as well. Ross Gay has a short prose piece about time, which is a little miraculous golden nugget. And that brings me actually to something else I wanted to say, which is the cover of the journal is absolutely stunning. Traditionally, the journal has the letters that spell out poetry on its cover in different fonts and, illustrations. And this time, each of the letters is a different timekeeping device. And as you can see, it's really rather intriguing. Especially, the most intriguing to me was the ancient Chinese dragon clock, which has a piece of incense that's sort of stuck across the dragon's, from the dragon's mouth to the tail. And as the incense burns, the ash falls onto these brass balls that are hung on strings. And when the ash burns through the strings, the brass balls fall and make a sound. And that's the sound of time progressing. So, something interesting, among many interesting things, that Nikki Finney said. She didn't talk about the tradition of prosody. She talked about the tradition of rhythm that she likes to use, which is connected to dance and the history of black dance. And she mentioned the, the Lindy Hop, which is an African-American dance that was very popular in the 30s, and how she uses that in her poetry. And so that when she mentioned that, it came to my mind that, it's all very well to study meter, and I do think it's, really interesting, and I do think it's very important. But I think there's other traditions that are equally as important and have been ignored. So, yeah. What else do I want to say? As far as the rest of the magazine, I can... Let me have a look. I can give you an idea of how varied the poets are. It's quite something to me. After the Seeley Challenge, I'm finding it really tough to read a magazine and jump from one poet to the next. I got used, in those 30 days of the Seeley Challenge, I got used to reading one poet a day and delving into their book. And now I'm jumping from poet to poet, and I found it to be quite challenging, but it's something I'm working on it like a muscle. So you start off with 2 poems by Yusuf Kumenyaka. What an excellent poet he is. An excellent beginning to this magazine. Then there's 3 prose poems by Victoria Chang. You'll probably remember, if you're playing along, that I talked about her latest book for the Seeley Challenge. Now, Victoria Chang has chosen to write the poems using 3 works by Agnes Martin, and I'll put the 3 works up here as inspiration. And I love the work of Agnes Martin. I think she is her work is abstract. I think it's expressionistic No, it's abstract expressionism. In any case, it's abstract. But Victoria Chang's poems are not abstract, and that really disappointed me. Then there's Alex Dimitrov, Birthday in Palm Springs. I know his name because he's a colleague and friend of Dorothy Lasky, and Alex Dimitrov, together with Dorothy Lasky, make up the Astropoets. They're very good fun. I'll leave a link. Karina McGlynn, Deshaun Washington, Trevor Kettner. I mean, you jump from one poet to another. You have poems that are political, you have poems that are not, poems that are personal, poems that are written in different forms. You have a couple of conceptual poems, and then all of the Carolyn Marie Rogers, and then a couple of commentaries on Carolyn Marie Rogers. You get a lot, and I'm just finishing it before the November issue comes out, so that's good. It's lasted me the month. It's really rather lovely. I'm very much looking forward to the next one. Lastly, there's another podcast episode that I want to recommend. The Poetry Foundation also has had a podcast called VS, and it was for quite a while hosted by Denise Smith and Franny Choi. Both of their books I discussed through the Seeley Challenge. Well, they moved on to other things, and there are two new hosts, and their first episode has just come out, and they are actually in discussion with Denise Smith and Franny Choi. So run, don't walk to listen to them. They're fabulous. The new hosts are Ajnay Dawkins and Brittany Rogers. Okay, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Let me know if you do pick up the poetry magazine and what you think of it. And don't forget, the only real property is the property of the mind. Thank you. Bye.